The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday afternoon. We got echoing back there. All right, we get rid of that. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I know it's morning for those of you on the West Coast, and it's probably evening if there's anybody here from Europe or from, I'm not even sure what time it is in Australia. But welcome, all of you. It's probably late in Australia, right? 15 hours ahead, something like that. Early in the morning. All right. Welcome. Hopefully you guys enjoyed yesterday's show with Amish. I certainly did. I always do. I think he's super clear, super rational, super efficacious in terms of what he does, and I think too many people give him a hard time not understanding the context of what he's doing, but also not appreciating that somebody actually has expertise in something versus the many, many, many thousands of amateur epidemiologists out there in the world that open up YouTube channels, including doctors and people with PhDs. But amateur epidemiologists, it is a true pleasure to actually talk to somebody who is an expert in a field. I love experts. Love experts. That's why I often cite some of the what do you call it, Substacks that I do. I love people who understand what they're talking about, that know their field inside out in whatever that field happens to be. So I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to talking to a series of other experts later in the month on different topics. But yes, I mean, I hope you guys enjoy the interviews, and don't forget that these interviews and the whole Yaron Brook Show is made possible through contributions that you guys make to the show. This is you are the source of income for the show. You make my time, you pay for my time. So to the extent that you value what we are producing here, what we're creating here, what we're building here, please become a supporter of the Yaron Brook Show on yaronbrookshow.com/support. Patreon, Subscribe Star, Locals. You can, I think on Locals, you can even contribute to the show using crypto. I'll also be providing you in the weeks to come with a crypto address, so you can send over Bitcoin or Ethereum or any kind of crypto that you like to support the show. But generally, your support for the show is what makes it possible. If I lose that support, lose that income, we shut down, do something else. Also, this is an expression of the fact that you see value in it, value for value. We are supposed to be appreciative of the value of trade over here. Many of you are quite happy to be free riders. All right. That is legal, legit. You can free ride because we're offering all of this for free. But I think being a trader just is better for you. All right, Super Chat is open. Catherine is here to make sure we get to the $600 goal. We'll stay here until we get there. Well, maybe not, but we'll stay here for a long time to try to get there. Feel free to ask questions about anything, although preference will be given to issues of foreign policy, because that is the topic that we're going to be talking about today. So December is usually a time when you kind of do a review of the year, looking forward into the next year, and evaluation and appreciation of kind of the future. So today we're going to talk about highlights of 2021 in terms of foreign policy, but primarily I want to look forward into 2022 and into the further future. What are some of the big challenges? some of the issues, what are the big gaps, what are the real problems that we are all, the Biden administration, all of us are going to face vis-a-vis foreign policy. So that is going to be a central feature. That is going to be what we're going to talk about today. So foreign policy, and to the extent that you guys have questions on foreign policy, Super Chat is available. I already see quite a few writing about Russia. That's great. We're going to start off talking about Russia because Russia's in the news. Russia and Ukraine are right now in the news. We're going to talk about the incompetence of U.S. foreign policy under Biden, under Trump, under Obama, under Bush, under all presidents going back at least to the Second World War. So we'll be talking a lot about all of that. Stephen asked us, just to get us going, do you make more off your finance endeavors or the show? In a even semi-decent year, well, it depends, right? Certainly in 2020, I made more money off of the show than I did of finance because, I didn't make much money at all off of my financial endeavors. This year, I'll make more money off of the finance than off the show. Every year is going to be different. Ideally, I'd make money off of the finance activities, and that would be my expectation, is that I make significantly more money off of the finance than the show. But none of that is guaranteed. And much of how I think about my finances, and I don't know why this should interest any of you guys, but since Stephen asks, is I view the show as primarily funding my expenditures and my financial income, primarily funding my saving, so that I can get to a point where I can do all this stuff for free and not care about it, which is my goal. FU money, if you remember, FU money is my goal, and that is going to require saving, and that's what my financial endeavor. So I try to live off of, or to at least, I don't know, about 60-70% of what I need to live off of coming from the show, and then whatever excess I have from financial endeavors goes into saving. All right, let's look. We've already got some Super Chat questions relating to the topic, but let's start with just a kind of a quick overview of the state of the world in which we live. From a foreign policy perspective, centered in the United States, right? So we're looking at the world from the perspective of the United States, from the perspective of the interests of the citizens of the United States, from the perspective of the protection of the individual rights of American citizens. That is the perspective that I take on foreign policy. I am an American. I think America overall is right now the only potential force of good in foreign policy in the world out there. It doesn't do a very good job at being a force for good, so mostly it's a force for bad, but everybody else is a force for even worse. So America is the prism from which we will look at the world. American foreign policy should be, and these are kind of the foundations, the basics, the context from which I look at the world. The American foreign policy should be focused entirely on the protection of individual rights of Americans. That is the protection of life, liberty, and property of Americans. And it should be engaging in the world to the extent that it needs that protection. In the analysis we're going to look at today, we're going to assume the government that we have. So, you can ask me about what my prescriptions to any one of these crises, any one of these problems would be, how I would handle any one of them. But the reality is that is very hard to say, because the fact is that if I were in charge, that is, if my views were in charge, if I was in charge, I couldn't get anything done because nobody would agree with me. But if my views were in charge, if there was a significant proportion of Americans who supported my views of foreign policy, then everything as a package would be different. No one, and it's not about addressing any particular conflict. It's about the positioning of America in the world, the positioning of American foreign policy in the world, the attitude that America takes towards foreign policy in the world. So you can ask about that what I would do in an ideal situation about the challenges of the United States as a package. But dealing with each one of these issues independently is meaningless. We're stuck with dealing with each one of these issues independently in the world in which we live right now, because the United States does not have and has not had a cohesive, integrated strategy, foreign policy strategy, for decades. So it has to, because the fundamental principle behind American foreign policy is that there are no principles of foreign policy guiding America. And therefore, every conflict, every issue, every country, every challenge is singular. It's independent, viewed as independent. And you have to deal with them completely separately. So there is, the American foreign policy today is completely, 100% pragmatist and guided by pragmatism. All right, let's see. So let's quickly do a scan of the world. We're going to look at what I believe are the 4 major challenges the United States faces from a foreign policy perspective in the world out there. We're going to talk a little bit about each one of them, and then I see you guys have a lot of questions that relate to many of these. But and it's great to see so many $20 questions, so thank you for doing that. It makes reaching our goals much easier, and it makes me much more motivated. But I also know that a lot of you can't afford to do $20 questions. I don't want to discourage you from asking questions, but thank you for all of you trying to do $20. I know some of you only do $19.99 because for whatever reason the software will only allow that. So I'm going to look at 4 areas in which I think the U.S. has major challenges and is going to be dramatically challenged in terms of foreign policy, to a large extent because these are the areas that the United States has chosen today to be challenged within. And then we will take some of your questions and maybe focus more specifically on some of these based on the questions that you have. So I think the 4, just to give you a heads up, the 4 that we're talking about, and again, I'm open to suggestions from you regarding otherwise. The 4 are Russia, China, Iran, and terrorism. And to a large extent, Iran and terrorism are linked to one another. But Russia, China, Iran, and terrorism are the 4, I think, major challenges to U.S. foreign policy over the next few years, and have been the major challenges for the United States over the last few years, and we can talk about that. So let's start, not because it's the most important challenge, but it is the one that is in the news, that is the one that's out there right now. It is the one that people are discussing, and of course, it is the one that the Biden administration is engaged with the most right now, and that is Russia. Again, not because necessarily this is the most important. I think in terms of U.S. interest, it's probably the least important of all of these, but certainly in terms of the world, in terms of our allies, and in terms of the attention it is getting, it is Russia. As many of you have probably read and have seen, Russia seems to be amassing large numbers of troops, and I think 100 battalions, 100,000 troops, tanks, and a variety of different weapon systems on the Ukrainian border. And intelligence sources are predicting a move by Russia sometime early next year, probably they claim in January. I'll tell you in a minute why I don't think this makes any sense. Just me, but it doesn't make any sense to me. But are predicting a significant move by the Russians sometime in January of next year to basically a mass invasion of Ukraine, at the very least, to take possession, take control of the eastern part of Ukraine, but with the potential of occupying all of Ukraine. I think for many reasons, taking just the eastern part of Ukraine does not fulfill the strategic purposes that Russia actually has in mind here. Just one small thing that, I don't know, struck me when I heard these intelligence assessments, and that it bewilders me, but I haven't read it really addressed, and I haven't read anything about it, and maybe I'm wrong here, maybe I'm missing something, but who the hell would engage in starting a war that could be pretty quick and decisive if done right, in January in Ukraine? Like, I don't know what you guys know about the weather in January on the Ukrainian-Russian border, but it is a disaster. It is cold, it snows, it's freezing constantly. This is the part of the world that defeated, that made the Nazi army really struggle. This is a part of the world that brought Napoleon to his knees. It's not clear to me that you start a war in Ukraine in January. Now, again, particularly if you want what I think the Russians, I mean, if I was invading Ukraine, and given the difference in forces between the Ukrainians and the Russians, I would use a blitzkrieg strategy. I would amass the troops on the border and just drive quickly and fast, as quickly and as fast as possible through Ukraine, going to Kiev or whatever the ultimate goal is for the Russian. I wouldn't get bogged down in a war of attrition. I would actually blitzkrieg the place, if that was the goal. You don't do blitzkrieg, in the middle of winter. For that matter, you don't do blitzkrieg in the beginning of spring either, because what happens in the beginning of spring? In the beginning of spring, everything is mud. The snow is melting. Everything is mud. You'd get bogged down. I mean, if you want to blitzkrieg, you blitzkrieg at the end of the spring. You blitzkrieg when the ground firms up. You blitzkrieg into the summer, so that you're already done by the next winter. Anyway, that's just me. For whatever my military strategy is worth, you can assess. But I don't know. So I'm a little suspicious that the Russian accumulation of forces on the Ukrainian border right now is more to get Biden to the negotiating table. It's more to put fear into the Europeans. It's more to send a message to the world than it is to actually engage in warfare. It just doesn't strike me as you engage in warfare during this kind of period in time. All right, somebody's asking about my debate with Khazoni in Austin on Wednesday. It is free to go in, and you don't have to register. The information is all available online. If you follow me on Twitter, I've been posting a lot of links to it. But look under the Salem Center at the University of Texas in Austin, Salem, S-A-L-E-M Center. They have all the information there. I think the debate starts at 7 p.m. And all the information is there. But no, there's no advanced registration required. There's no fee. Please come. We're very much hoping for a large audience. I'm very much hoping that conservatives on campus, that students come. If you know students at the University of Texas, please encourage them to come. If you have contacts with the conservative groups, left-wing groups, anybody. But my hope is a lot of students come, and that my real fear is that students are the one who don't come. That we get a lot of adults and we get a lot of community people, but we don't get students. But I'm hoping we get at least the conservative students to come. That would be terrific. So if you have any contacts within the University of Texas, please use them to bring in a larger audience, as large of an audience as possible. The debate will be in English, in spite of the fact people have asked, in spite of the fact that both Yoram and I could do the debate in Hebrew. But I fear he would have an advantage there. All right. Let's see. We were talking about Russia and Ukraine. Why is Russia worried about Ukraine? I mean, because Russia wants a strategic buffer between it and NATO. Russia would like, long term, Russia would like to resurrect the Soviet Union. Russia would love to have its sphere of influence include significant portions of Eastern Europe. It has influence in places like Hungary. It has influence in places like the Balkans, certainly in Serbia, all the way down to Montenegro. It would like to have Belarus and other of its former satellites. But NATO has now expanded through Poland. It has now expanded quite a bit east. Hungary, even though Russia has a lot of influence on Hungary, I think is a member of NATO, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, there is a lot of encroachment by the West into what the Russians think and view as their sphere of influence, and what they would like to assure, what they would like guarantees, and this is what they're negotiating right now with Biden and the Europeans, is that Ukraine will not be invited into NATO. What Russia wants is they do not want NATO on their border. They already have NATO on some of their border, in the Baltics and elsewhere. They do not want NATO in Ukraine, and that is their primary fear. They ultimately would like Ukraine, if not to be part of Russia, they would like Ukraine to be part of the kind of Russian umbrella, part of Russian influence within Eastern Europe. And they are set on this, and it's not just Ukraine. I mean, Russia is threatening right now on the Baltics. There's particular fear right now of Lithuania falling under the influence of Russia. Again, the Baltics are NATO countries, which the Russians don't like, because that puts, again, NATO on the Russian border. It also means that if Russia gets pissed off at Estonia and decides to invade Estonia, as it has threatened to do on a number of occasions, that means declaring war on NATO, and Russia doesn't want that. It wants to be able to deal with Estonia and deal with Lithuania, deal with Latvia, which are tiny little countries right there on the border. They would like to deal with them without having to risk war, all-out war with the United States, which is what the United States membership in NATO now secures. So this part of the world, Eastern Europe, is going to be in play over the next few years, over the next decade. And, of course, the United States has no coherent strategy on how to address it. Nobody in the U.S. really wants to go to war with Russia. Nobody can imagine doing that. Russia is a nuclear power. We don't know how Putin would respond to, U.S. troops being deployed in Ukraine to protect Ukraine, or to actually be shooting at Russian troops. I don't think Americans want that. I don't know that Americans are really interested in engaging in war in Europe to defend what American interest exactly, to defend what threat to American individual rights or property exactly, to really defend the Germans and the Poles from Russian influence. But what American life, property, liberty is at stake in Ukraine? None, in my view. And I don't think most Americans would like to see that, and I think the Russians know that. So they're taking advantage of the fact that the United States is not highly motivated to engage in war with them. And they're taking advantage of that in order to threaten Ukraine, try to influence Ukraine to be more affiliated with them, show the Ukrainians that the United States is a paper tiger and that Europeans won't come to their defense, and therefore kind of push the Ukrainians into the bear hug of the Russians. It's interesting because NATO here, again, is split. You've got the Hungarians are very friendly with the Russians in spite of being members of NATO. The Turks are very friendly with the Russians in spite of being members of NATO. But on the other side, the Turks are selling weapons to the Ukrainians. The Turks were always also engaged in a war with Russia, in a sense, in last year, in a war that nobody in the United States cared about, but between the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis. The Turks supported the Azeris, the Azerbaijanis, and the Russians supported the Armenians. The Turks won that war, funnily enough, and it was primarily Turkish drone technology that won that. Ukraine today has Turkish drone technology, quite advanced Turkish drone technology that the Russians are actually worried about. Yeah, I mean, this is multifaceted in that sense. The Poles are anti-Russia, but as I said, certain other Eastern European countries are pro. So part, I think, of the Russian strategy, grand strategy, Russians probably have more of a strategy than we do, is to sow as many seeds of disarray within NATO, to show the Ukrainians NATO won't come to their support, and again, ultimately to shift Ukraine, whether through war or whether through just shoving and pushing and urging and to push Ukraine into the sphere of influence of Russia. Of course, all of this is also under the guise of the whole question of energy. Ukraine needs to get its natural gas from Russia, as does most of Western Europe. Western Europe depends on natural gas coming from Russia. Of course, this is not inevitable. France, for example, doesn't need natural gas from Russia because France uses nuclear technology to produce electricity. Of course, many of these countries, particularly the UK, have a lot of natural gas that they could get through fracking. But of course, these countries have banned fracking and don't do fracking, and therefore find themselves now completely dependent on natural oil and natural gas. Russia, of course, to add to all of this complexity, Russia is a relatively poor country that has basically one strength economically, and that is energy, natural gas and oil. Right now, Putin is feeling strong, relatively rich. He personally, of course, is super rich, but relatively rich, and that is because prices of oil and natural gas are through the roof. But in an environment in which natural gas and oil prices decline, Russia's economy is completely dependent on that. It's completely dependent on the movement of natural gas and oil. Other than that, it is not a very diversified economy, and it is not a very strong economy. It is a very poor, relatively speaking, a very poor country. Putin has not been very successful in terms of achieving dramatic economic growth and dramatic increases in standard of living for his citizens, and yet he is beloved by most Russians because he is a strong man, and they admire that. So I think here's the combination. Russia is weak, but Europe and the United States are weaker. Not economically weaker, not militarily weaker, but they have no will. The United States has no real interest in Ukraine. Europeans who might have interest in Ukraine have zero will, zero interest, and maybe even zero capabilities of standing up to the Russians militarily, so they're not going to get involved. This is Russia's to lose. Biden can do nothing. He can send weapons to Ukraine, which I think is what he should be doing, but he's not going to deploy U.S. military forces there unless there's somebody really stupid in his administration, which is quite possible, and it gives him really bad advice. Long term, it's likely, unless the Russian economy collapses, it's likely that Putin wins this battle and Ukraine becomes a satellite of Russia. And Europe suffers a consequence. I think all of this places Europe in a very precarious situation where they've got Russia breathing down their throat, the U.S. not willing to defend Europe, and Europe not willing to spend the money to defend itself. That is Russia. And it's hard for me to keep track. Ali asked, why should the U.S. we'll do Europe first, and I'll look at these. Why should the U.S. defend European countries? What did this bring to the table? It only extends the failure of European socialist experiment. U.S. always takes the toll for no reason to protect these weak countries. Germany just shut down all nuclear plants. I agree, Ali. I don't think the U.S. should protect Europe. I have said for a very long time that the U.S. should leave NATO. Unless NATO can restructure itself, can change itself, where the Europeans take responsibility for the defense of Europe, and NATO just becomes a coalition of free countries where we come together to, it could be a UN-like entity for free countries, right? And maybe some defense alignments over shared enemies. But the fact is that Europe is rich enough, wealthy enough to defend itself. I think that in the past, the idea was we never wanted the Germans to arm themselves. We never trusted the Germans to have a strong military. I don't think you have any option. Germany is the largest economy in Europe, and as such is the economy that can best protect itself militarily, the country best able to protect Europe from a threat like the Russians. I think that the United States should leave NATO. I think that the United States should close its bases in Germany or keep minimal staff in Germany, maybe an airfield with staff there, so they can project power from Germany to places where it has an interest to project that power. But it should stop pretending. It should stop positioning itself as if it is going to defend Europe. We shouldn't be defending Europe. Again, Europe is rich enough, wealthy enough to be able to support its own defense. There is no moral reason, and there is no political reason why one American life should be lost in defense of Lithuania, Estonia, in defense of Germany. One of the most horrific decisions that an American president has made in all of American history. Maybe the worst, if not certainly one of the worst decisions made, maybe by my least favorite president of all time, was the decision by Woodrow Wilson to join World War I. There was zero reason for the United States to intervene in the slaughter of World War I. Europeans were doing a fine job killing each other. Why the United States had to intervene there and get tens of thousands of Americans killed for absolutely no reason, for defending no real interest of the United States of America. Indeed, if the United States had not entered World War I, who knows if we would have had a World War II, who knows what would it look like. The whole history of Europe would have been shaped and done differently. And I think the history of the United States would have been different. But Americans were enthusiastic about joining World War I. I mean, American kids went to that war to a large extent positive, with a positive vibe. Why? Ayn Rand was against the United States joining, even fighting World War II. Obviously, there was no choice once Pearl Harbor was attacked, but she strongly believed that the United States should do everything that it can to stay out of it. Again, for similar reasons. Why not let the Soviets and the Nazis fight it out and slaughter each other? She was against sending aid to the Soviet Union in order to defeat the Nazis. So there's absolutely no reason for the United States to position itself in a way as to protect the interests of no reason to do it other than, of course, the military would like it. The military likes having bases all over the world. Other than there are plenty of special interests that would like to do it, but there's no American interest to actually get involved in this. Let me just take this question right off the bat. You have blue pill view of foreign policy. The U.S. foreign policy is solely dictated by special interest. You are someone who believes the gas attack in Syria was proven to be a hoax. Yeah, Scott Horton are good. Scott Horton is a hack, as is the other guys. No, these things were not hoaxes. That is bizarre and ridiculous. And the Iranian threat is real. And no, it is they that would like to sell you on the pill that has been common in the United States for a long, long time, where the United States is the villain in world policy, where the United States is the bad guy, where the United States is the one that causes all the problems in the world. And no, the Iranians are all nice guys that just want to bring happiness to their own people, and it is America that's stopping them. You keep on reading the pacifist, ignorant libertarians on foreign policy. Have fun with that. But no, they are wrong. These things have not been proven to be fake. They know nothing about the Middle East. I've seen nothing to suggest that any of these people really understand the dynamics of the Middle East, the philosophy of the Middle East, the power plays in the Middle East, what is actually going on in the Middle East. You can disagree. You can disagree with me about foreign policy. That's fine, but do it out of a position of knowledge and facts, not a position of fantasy. Let me see. Will concerns for national security, fuel supply for Europe finally awaken Europeans to pursue energy independence? Right now, they are held hostage to Russians for gas supply who leverages towards Ukraine and Belarus. But it doesn't look like that, right? If yelling straw man 1,000 times says a lot about you more than anything else. So good, that's great. No, I don't think it's going to wake the Europeans. I mean, Europeans, their view of energy independence is let's put solar panels in cloudy Germany and let's build windmills all over the place. That is, all right. So the guy who asked that question, I mean, he did put $20 into it, so that's why I answered it. But the insults he is making online, give you a sense of the quality of the views, right? I mean, when he doesn't like something that somebody is saying, he calls them gay. That's all you have to know about somebody's views about a topic is if you can evaluate them based on their insults. So no, the Europeans are not going to learn anything. And again, they are 100%. Unprincipled, short range, unthinking. They're investing in all the wrong technologies. There's no push to bring in nuclear power. There's no push to frack. There's no push to build LNG ports and import natural gas in the United States. The real push should be for nuclear, of course. On the contrary, the Germans have supported this pipeline from Russia and to make themselves even more dependent on Russian natural gas. They're not learning anything from the natural threat, from the threat to Ukraine. This is there's no reason to believe that Europe is going to wake up to all of this. All right, let's see. Low Legend says, Russia is by far the most dangerous, a dying country with a bunch of nukes. China benefits from stabilization. Russia looks to inflict chaos. We'll talk about China in a minute. I don't think Russia wants too much chaos because it is weak. Russia is, the theme of what I want to say is what is causing instability in the world, what is causing all the problems of the world is fundamentally U.S. weakness. The understanding among our enemies that the United States is worse than a paper tiger. Paper is strong as compared to what the United States foreign policy. We have no foreign policy. We have no principles. We're not willing to use force. When we're willing to use force, we're not willing to do it in a way that actually wins. It doesn't matter who's president. It doesn't matter if Biden's president or Trump is president or Obama or Bush or anybody was president. The United States is a weakling, has been a weakling for decades. And what countries are doing is they're pushing buttons to see how far they can go and how they can promote their own interests and see what the United States does. In Europe, of course, it's not that we should be weak, it's that we should not be there. We should just not be in a position where our buttons can be pushed in Europe. But if we are there, if we are NATO, if we do have troops in Europe, that complicates the situation. Then you either stand up to the Russians or you tell the Europeans to stand up to the Russians and move out. Right? Or move out. Things have not gotten worse in the last year. I mean, God. Foreign policy, Putin has been emboldened, since 1914 when he took Crimea. Trump didn't do anything to stymie Putin. Indeed, Putin became more aggressive in places like Syria, much more aggressive in places like Syria. under Trump. Trump did nothing to hold back China from taking over Hong Kong. Trump did nothing to hold back Turkey from asserting itself in the Middle East and elsewhere and basically turning its back on the United States. Trump was a disaster when it came to foreign policy. Biden is more of a disaster when it comes to foreign policy. It just all accelerates. Trump didn't get the Europeans to pay for their defense. He didn't do it. He claimed to do that. He wanted to do that. I supported that. I supported getting out of NATO. But even Trump didn't do that because Trump was weak and he never did anything on principle. And therefore, he could never really follow through on any of that. So I don't think Russia's going to just keep pushing, but Russia doesn't want war with the West or with the United States because Russia would lose. Russia would lose big time. Russia is not in a position of strength. Russia's in a position of weakness. It'll milk everything it can out of the fact that the United States and Europe will not fight for what they claim they believe in. They won't fight. All right, let's see. I'm looking to see if there's other. Oh God, Based Clay just has, he's read all the conspiracy theories about the different movers and shakers in the world. So he has, do you think that Victor Nuland, the orchestrator of the failed coup in Ukraine in 2014, where they armed neo-Nazis and orchestrated, and then an upcoming coup in Venezuela since the United States failed with a puppet leader, Juan Guaido. I don't think much of, I don't think one way or another of Victoria Nuland. You know, if they were arming neo-Nazis, I can't be a supporter of them. I don't think the neo-Nazis are the solution to socialists. And Venezuela, nothing will happen in Venezuela until the Venezuelan people actually want change. Actually want change. All right, Ali says, I'm not sure why U.S. Too focused on Russia while China is the only threat for the U.S. because it does the money and power have their effect. U.S. is focused on Russia because Russia is the only one that is actually using military force and threatening relatively free countries like Ukraine. So the only large nuclear power in the world right now engaged in military activities threatening the sovereignty of other countries is Russia. So again, I don't think the United States should get involved other than to sell Ukraine. But that's why China, and we'll get to China in a minute, with all its issues, and it's got border skirmishes with India. It's got some stuff going on in South China Sea, but it's not amassing 100,000 troops on somebody's border. All right, let's talk about China. So my view is arm the Ukrainians, stay out of it, but more fundamentally, if you want a principled foreign policy, get out of NATO, get most of our troops out of Europe, let the Europeans fund their own defense. You probably have to do this over a period, give a 5-year runway for the Europeans to ramp up, or 4-year runway, one presidency, for the Europeans to ramp up their own capacity for defending themselves and get out of there and stop the implicit defense of Europe from people like the Russians. If the United States decide that Russia is a threat to the individual rights and freedoms of Americans, then an alliance with Europeans to defeat the Russians makes sense. But I don't see that happening, so let the Europeans deal with the Russians. All right, let's see. China. Obviously, China is the rising superpower right now. China has probably got the second most powerful military in the world. I think it's probably more powerful than the Russians, although it is not exactly battle-tested. The Russians are, at least the Russian weapon systems, have been battle-tested around the world. They're not very good, is the ultimate, I think, manifestation of that. But I think there's good reason to believe The Chinese are more technologically advanced in terms of their weapon systems than the Russians. China, of course, is a much, much bigger economy than Russia. It can devote significantly more money to its military. And in spite of all of that, just to put this into perspective, China still has a military that is significantly inferior, both technologically, in terms of, and the quality of its weapon systems, its quality of things like its aircraft carriers, the quality of its navy, the quality of its air force, and of course the quality of and the battle-testedness. That's not a word, but you know what I mean. The experience. Than the United States. The United States by far has the mightiest military force on the planet today. Militarily, we don't want to get into a war with China because, again, you don't want to confront a country that has nuclear weapons. But the United States, I don't think, would fear a conventional war with China. I think we are significantly stronger, and I think our nuclear capabilities are significantly greater than the Chinese, but that's not something you ever want to have to test. The Chinese are asserting themselves in various parts, certainly on the Indian border, where there's a section of the border that is in conflict, where they have disagreements about it. They're asserting themselves in the South China Sea. After all, it is the South China Sea, so it is in their backyard. You can understand why I think the Chinese would be interested in asserting their power in that part of the world. It's not clear that the United States can or should do anything about that. Are we really going to go to war with the Chinese about their naval activities in what's called the South China Sea, which is, in a sense, their sea? Probably not. So in terms of a military confrontation, I don't think the Chinese want military confrontations. I don't think they're interested in war right now. They've got, we'll talk about this in a minute, they've got a lot of problems internally. China is certainly not interested in going to war with the United States. It can only lose from that. It has nothing to gain from it. China is trying to assert itself in the world in other means, trying to use diplomacy, money in order to gain allies all across the world, particularly in areas rich in natural resources, all across Asia, with the Belt and Road Initiative, which is supposed to link China with Europe over land through Asia. It is also building ports all over the world. But the fact is that if you really look at the Belt Initiative and what is it actually achieving, it is super expensive for the Chinese, super expensive. It is draining resources from them. It is actually turning many countries that are dealing with China against China. The quality of the infrastructure being built is not very good. These countries are going into debt to China, and the Chinese are squeezing them, which these countries do not like. You're seeing the popularity or the attitude towards China in terms of people around the world, that is in decline because China has been strong-arming country after country after country, and people don't like to be strong-armed. China is not gaining many friends around the world through the strategy that the Chinese are engaged in right now. So the Chinese are, I think, in a ever weaker position vis-a-vis their foreign policy. They want to become a power. They want to become the go-to country that is challenging the United States. And yet I think their position in the world ultimately is going to weaken, not strengthen. It's going to weaken again because this Belt and Road Initiative is being done in a way that is alienating the world against them. But on top of that, the real problem is going to be that China just doesn't have the resources to devote to subsidizing the rest of the world and to building infrastructure in the rest of the world purely at its own expense. And here it brings me to the fact that I think that Russia, that China generally has major problems inside China that are going to hamper its ability to project its power, its strength around the world. And again, why I think people overestimate the threats of China, overestimate the economic power of China. They overestimate what China is capable of doing. A number of things with regard to China. One is economic growth in China is slowing. It's still much higher than it is in the United States, at least according to the official numbers, but it is significantly slowing. And that is a consequence of bad economic policies that are being brought to the forefront by Xi. President Xi, I would say over the last 7 years, he's been president, and he looks like he's now basically there for life. Xi Jinping is basically a failure. He's a failure from the perspective of China. He has governed over a dramatic slowdown in economic growth in China. He has governed over several significant financial and real estate crises in China, and I fear that from the perspective of China, we haven't yet seen how bad it can get. I think it could get a lot worse. His economic policies, which include, to a large extent, they include the increased regulation and control over private companies, the increased reliance on state-owned enterprises, the increased role of the state in the economy. All of these policies are losers, are policies that are going to lose. They're policies that are going to diminish the economic success of China. They're economic policies that are penalizing the most successful parts of the Chinese economy. His crackdown on industries are not going to be, they're only going to bring negative consequences. They're going to be no positive consequences. Imposition of more industrial policy, of more central planning, of more involvement of the Chinese Communist Party is only going to continue to slow down economic growth and to make the Chinese economy more susceptible to crises than anything else. So I view China economically as entering into a next decade of real economic challenges. Now, I think that's true of the US. I think it's true of for other reasons, of Europe as well. But China is not going to be this success story. It's not going to be this country that is growing with no end. It's not going to, and I don't think it can avoid internal strife. I don't think it's going to avoid the kind of citizenry that is upset by the fact that they're not rising into middle classhood as fast as they were promised, that they're not as free as they expected to be. I think you will see growing resentment within China over Chinese policies, and we'll get to COVID in a second because I think that's part of the problem that Xi is going to have to live with. So China is entering a period of real economic uncertainty and real economic challenges. Second, as I mentioned, there's a lot of anger and fear at China and a lot of angst about China because of the Belt and Road initiative. China is taking over ports, but those ports are not profitable, so they're going into debt in order to run those ports. They have amassed huge amounts of debt to build up this infrastructure, debt that the countries can't pay back. So even though the Chinese then take over the infrastructure and own it, the infrastructure is not profitable. They can't pay back to themselves the debt. So in terms of net economic value, these are all negative investments, and that is only going to come bigger and bigger. You can read on ultimately the failure that the Chinese have encountered in the port in Sri Lanka, the rail projects in Africa, a whole host of projects in Malaysia, where these are not turning out well for the Chinese. And even their investment in Pakistan, now they confront this issue to what extent do they support the Taliban, and do they build projects in Afghanistan? But on the other hand, if they do that, they're supporting the Islamists. The Taliban are Islamists who are allies, potential allies to the Muslims within China. China has a massive Muslim problem. That's why they have these concentration camps in Western China. By emboldening Pakistan and by emboldening Afghanistan, they're being pragmatists. Long term, they're going to suffer the consequence of emboldening Muslims, and ultimately they will feel the consequence on their western border. So China has a tricky relationship internationally, and particularly with the Muslim neighbors that they have to their west. This does not, their reputation in the world has taken a massive hit because of COVID, but also because of the way they practice diplomacy out there, their arrogance, and given, I think, the weakness that Xi actually has, the economic weakness that he's going to experience over the next decade, I think this is only going to hurt him even more diplomatically and further. And then finally, COVID. COVID is a disaster for China. It's a disaster partially because of the lockdowns. It's a disaster because China went for a zero COVID policy. We talked about this with Amos yesterday. The idea was, we'll eradicate COVID, we'll get rid of it. You can't do that. You can shut down this city, you can shut down that city. There's still, we don't hear about this in the West, but there's still towns and cities being shut down periodically in China because of COVID. This has hurt production, this has hurt the economy, this has hurt employment, this has hurt wealth creation. Another reason why the Chinese economy has slowed. While it's done better than the West, fewer people in China are immune. China vaccines are proven to be unbelievably inefficient, ineffective. They're actually scrambling right now to develop their own mRNA vaccine because they realize the mRNA vaccines are so far superior to what the Chinese developed themselves. They tried to export these vaccines to other countries. Lots of countries bought these vaccines. They turned out to be horrible, horrific, terrible. The problem with China and COVID is, how now do they reverse course and accept the fact that COVID is something we're going to have to live with, given that so few people in China have had COVID, given that so few people in China have been vaccinated with an effective vaccine. The country is in turmoil internally. There are a lot of social unrest. There's a lot of social unrest that goes unreported in the West over restrictions that have to do with COVID and over the complete failure of Xi Jinping's kind of COVID policies within China. So. I think China is it's still going to get richer because economic growth will still be positive, but it's going to face real challenges. Remember that GDP per capita in China, even adjusted for purchasing power, is average is a third of a developed country. China is still, for the people in China, still a poor country. It might be by some measures the largest economy in the world, but at the same time, it's also from a standard of living perspective, one of the poorest countries in the world. Right? So, China is, I think, in real trouble. I think it's real trouble. They're stuck with Xi Jinping unless somebody within the Communist Party is willing to challenge him and overthrow him, or unless you get significant internal strife, demonstrations, social unrest, significant social unrest in China. It looks like Xi Jinping is going to be there for a while. That's not good for China. He's a failed leader in every dimension. He is weak. He's strong in terms of his control over China, but he's failed China in every aspect. And COVID is just the last, way in which he's failed. However, COVID came to be, whatever the source of COVID ultimately turns out to be, the way China has dealt with it is the wrong way. And the way China is dealing with it is the wrong way. And, they will not be growing their power globally. I think that power has probably peaked. And again, the only reason China that it might not have peaked. The only reason there's any chance that China, could be still successful from a foreign policy perspective is the weakness of the United States. That is the one theme that runs through all of this. The United States is weak. Okay, I'm going to look for China-related questions. Do you know what China and Russia's opinion of each other is? Well, I mean, they view each other with great suspicion. They are tentative allies because they view themselves as kind of representing the bloc in opposition to the United States. Each, though, thinks of itself as superior to the other. The Russians look down on the Chinese, and certainly the Chinese look down on the Russians. The Chinese, they are two nuclear powers, but China is a growing economy. Russia is a stagnant economy. Right. And they have this tentative alliance, but they don't trust each other. Long-term and historically and in the future, they're not real allies. Even when they were communist, real communist, under Mao Zedong and under I can't remember, it was Khrushchev or who it was, Stalin originally, the alliance between China and Russia was very weak. One of the reasons Nixon went to China was because there was a real opening, because there was a real cooling of the relationship between China and Russia. And Nixon believed that he could shift China to be pro the US and anti the Soviets, which would be an advantage to the United States. So there's never been a close relationship and a good relationship between China and Russia. By the way, if you want to ask questions, if you want to make comments that I respond to, please use the Super Chat feature. You can do it at $2 or whatever, but that is the way to communicate with me. We're going to skip unrelated questions. My friend who is Ukrainian Russian, and she's teaching me Russian. We are sending a Christmas box to a family in Ukraine with American goodies. I got her to watch your show today. Do you have any words of comfort or advice? I like Ukraine. I've visited there several times. I've spoken in Ukraine. Ukraine has a lot of people who seem to like Ayn Rand, and Atlas Shrugged was the best-selling book in Ukraine, I think, in 2015. They used to sell it in the supermarket. It was so popular. It is a country that is stuck. It is stuck primarily because of its own corruption, the corruption of its own political class. It is a country filled with natural resources. It's a country filled with people who have real talent. What they need, and I think under the current president they're getting a little bit of. So I think the current president of Ukraine is probably the best they've had so far. But what they need is a real movement towards free markets. What they need is a real movement towards privatization. I once was asked in the Ukrainian parliament, in front of members of parliament, what my advice for Ukraine was. And my advice was privatize everything, including your whole Ukrainian land. And embrace capitalism fully. They obviously didn't listen to me, but the president right now is better. I think the Russians are going to be very hesitant to invade Ukraine. I think the Ukrainians could fight an effective guerrilla warfare against the Russians. The Russians could get bogged down for a very, very, very long time in Ukraine. It's probably not something the Russians want. What Ukraine really needs is to stand firm and to bring to it any allies that it can, buy weapons from anybody that it can, and stand firm against the Russians. And I think ultimately, even if Russia invades, I think that it can become so expensive and so devastating for the Russians that they will ultimately be humiliated and would have to lose. So. You're stuck in a horrible place in the world because you're bordering with the Russians. I know what that's like. Ultimately, I came from Israel, so I know what it's like to be stuck in a horrible place in the world. But you just got to stand up to the bullies, and you've got to defend yourself. Let me see. Do you think it's beneficial for the U.S. to dissolve all its treaties, agreements, and just say, if you want to trade with us, you can. We don't need pieces of paper saying that's okay to do. Yes, I mean, for the most part. I don't think you can do it all at once. You have to phase it out and do it properly. But yes, particularly trade deals. I think the United States should get out of all trade deals, declare itself a free trade zone, unilaterally lower tariffs to zero, and let anybody who wants to trade with Americans trade with Americans. Remember, the United States of America doesn't trade with anybody. In terms of defense treaties, it should it should bring the troops home. It should dissolve all of those defense treaties. It should bring troops home from South Korea and from Japan and from Germany. One would consider keeping certain military bases minimally staffed for, if you needed to project force, you could. So you want to keep a port in Asia, in the Pacific. You want to keep maybe a port and a airfield in Europe, and other than that, bring the troops home. We have troops in 170 countries, I think. We have tens of thousands, I think 40,000 troops in, where is it? I had it here a minute ago. Yeah, I closed the window. But we have, I sound like 40,000 troops in Germany. We have 28,000 troops in, I think, Japan. We have tens of thousands of troops in Korea. Most of those troops should be brought home. We could cut the defense budget significantly or reallocate those costs to building more, a bigger Navy if we thought that was necessary, to protect the shipping lanes, or to build more transportation aircraft if we needed to transport those aircrafts into Europe and other places. So yes, I believe we should dramatically trim our presence in the world. And the difference between that and what people like Rand Paul believe in is, I don't believe that means we should disengage. That is, we should still protect our interests. But that means that when protecting our interests, we should use overwhelming force, quick and brutal, and get out of the way. I don't think we should apologize for our strength. I don't think we should apologize for protecting ourselves. I don't think we should apologize to the world. But there's absolutely zero reason to have troops in the Middle East, to have troops in Asia, and to have troops in Europe. Get them home. All right, let's see. All right, let's just take this one. Jason asks, if a country like the Czech Republic would model itself like Switzerland, big if, should it leave the EU and or NATO? That's a big if, right? If it could, then maybe it would make sense to leave the EU. I'm not sure about NATO. There is, I think, some validity to having a European-based, without the United States, mutual defense agreement. I think the difference between the Czech Republic and Switzerland is history and geography. The Czech Republic is unlikely to be left alone if there was a European war. Switzerland is likely to be left alone. There's just a history now of it, and the Alps make it very difficult to invade. I don't think that's true of the Czech Republic. It is relatively easy to invade from a number of different directions. So I think the Czech Republic is too central and doesn't have the geography to allow it to be neutral. And therefore, I think that it would probably be good for the Czech Republic to have a mutual defense agreement, even if it was leaving the EU, given that it was Switzerland. But I don't see the Czech Republic becoming anything like Switzerland in terms of economic policy. It's very, very, very unlikely. All right, let's see. All right, that was China. Let's quickly do Iran and terrorism, and then there's still some questions, and we're already going well over an hour. And so Iran, I think, continues to be a threat to the United States in spite of what some libertarians would tell you. Iran is still developing nuclear weapons and still interested in having nuclear weapons. It's still interested in being a nuclear power. The problem and what differentiates Iran from other nuclear powers is that Iran is a theocracy. It is a religious, fanatic, nutty place. And you cannot you cannot trust a theocracy, particularly a theocracy that believes in, dying for Allah. You cannot trust such a theocracy with nuclear weapons because they might be willing to engage in a suicidal action. I think probably the nuclear power in the world today that is most likely ultimately to use nuclear weapons is Pakistan, for exactly that reason, for the reason that it could easily fall into the hands of Islamists or even existing people within the Pakistani power structure that will say dying, taking out 1 billion Hindus is worth it even if it means Pakistan is wiped out because we'll go to heaven as a consequence. You cannot deal with that kind of irrationality, that kind of death wish, that kind of insanity, and it's enough that we have that in Pakistan. I wish there was a way to diffuse that threat. I hope, I don't believe, but I hope that the United States has plans to somehow take over the Pakistani nuclear arsenal. If the time comes to have to do that, maybe the Indians have a plan to do that. I don't know, but it's certainly the case that if we can prevent Iran from ever achieving nuclear weapons, that should be a major goal of American foreign policy. Unfortunately, nobody is really committed to that goal. While the Trump administration withdrew from the Iranian nuclear deal, which was the right thing to do, it didn't take the next step, which was to, crush all of the facilities and all of the ability of the Iranians to engage in nuclear research and the development of nuclear weapons. The Israelis are continuously trying to do that. There was just yesterday or the day before yesterday, a big explosion not far from one of the nuclear power plants in Iran. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the Israelis destroying something, who knows what exactly, related to the nuclear program in Iran. So the Israelis are doing what they can to prevent the Iranians from developing nukes, with the help, I think, and one of the reasons why many of the Gulf states cut a deal with the Israelis was because they all view Iran as a threat. So they probably are helping them with intelligence and helping them with other things. But it would be good to wipe this threat out once and for all, and either for the United States to give Israel a green light to take the Iranians out, or for the Americans just to do it. I think I think overall giving Israel a green light to do it is maybe safer for the United States, easier for the United States, less political difficult for the United States. But it doesn't look like the United States is willing to do that. Trump didn't do it. Obama certainly didn't do it. Bush didn't do it. Bush actually prevented the United States from doing anything, Israel from doing anything. And it certainly does not look like Biden is going to do it. So Iran is emboldened by, again, the weakness of the United States. The whole world is emboldened by the weakness of the United States. As a consequence, Iran is gone to the negotiating table with Biden, basically telling them to shove it, and they don't really care what the United States thinks. They're basically going to the United States with demands that the United States says cannot give in to, basically delaying any kind of agreement, and in the meantime, developing their own, I'm sure, working to developing their own nuclear capability, so that the day will come where they'll say, well, all this negotiation is irrelevant because we already have nukes. Goodbye. If you add to that, right, if you add to that the fact that Iran has increased its global power, not global power, its power in the Middle East dramatically under Trump, since Bush through Trump, 9/11, the invasion of Iraq and the invasion of Afghanistan have increased the power of our largest enemy, our most significant enemy in the Middle East, which is Iran. Iran today, to a large extent, controls Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Much of that, particularly Syria and Lebanon, was achieved under Trump. They also now control Yemen, even though the Saudis are trying to push back against that. They've not been very successful. So they basically have Saudi Arabia and Egypt on three fronts. They've got them surrounded. They are becoming a significant, they're also a significant player in Afghanistan. With the United States leaving, they have real presence over there. In Afghanistan. So Iran has been a winner. On the other hand, Iran is very weak. They have weak weapons technologies. The only reason they have the kind of power they have is because they're fighting against enemies that are a lot weaker than them. And of course, it's because the United States won't defend itself and won't project its power over Iran. Iran is overall a very weak country, militarily and economically. Iran, like Russia, is completely dependent on natural resources. Right now, they're feeling strong and powerful because the price of oil is high. But when energy prices decline, they have a really hard time, and they got hit really hard by COVID. What surprises me, what continues to surprise me, is that we haven't seen an internal revolution in Iran. I don't understand it. The only explanation I have for that is the fact that the United States is not investing enough in the opposition in Iran and is not encouraging it to revolt against the regime, or that too much of the country is actually religious and supportive of this regime. But the fact is that at least within Tehran, I think the regime is in the minority, and there is a significant number of people within Tehran that would like to see the regime disappear. It's sad that there hasn't been an internal revolution internal revolution in the what do you call it, in Iran. That would have solved all our problems quite easily if Iran became a secular country. That would be pretty cool. I think we often tend to overestimate the degree to which countries are indeed secular, while the intelligentsia, the relative intelligentsia within Tehran might be. Many of them have left Iran, and in the countryside, Iran is very, very, very religious and committed to this regime. Let's see, I saw some Iran questions. Does it matter whether or not Iran agrees to return the 2015 nuclear deal? I mean, let's hope they don't, because I think the nuclear deal is a deal that actually allows the Iranians to, in the background, do all kinds of things to develop their nukes. It has very little verifiability in that treaty. So if there was a treaty, it would have to be, if there was a deal, it would have to be a revised deal, which was a lot stricter on the Iranians, and I don't think they'd agree to that. Generally, I don't think that agreement, I think that agreement was a betrayal of U.S. interests. I think that agreement was horrible. And it doesn't matter whether they agree or not to join it. What matters is, will they develop nuclear weapons, and is the United States committed to preventing that? I don't know, is the United States willing to use force in order to prevent it? That's all that matters. The treaty is irrelevant. It's just a place for the Iranians to flex their muscles and to show the Americans the extent to which the Americans are actually paper tigers. Terrorism, I expect to start seeing a rise in terrorism around the world, primarily targeted at U.S. interests. I think that will come probably not in 2022, but I'd say over the next 5 to 10 years. That'll come to a large extent because of the pathetic nature in which we fought in Afghanistan and the way in which we left Afghanistan. While I believe we should bring troops home from all over the world, we should make it clear to our enemies the consequences of killing Americans are going to be, right? So we're in a position in which the Islamists are being revitalized, primarily by the Afghanistan victory of the Taliban. They're being revitalized by Iran and Iran's victory over the last 10 years over American interests across the Middle East. You can imagine Iran starting to scheme about a war with Israel, where they attack Israel from Lebanon, Syria, from the West Bank, from the Gaza Strip, and with long-range missiles from Iran itself. That would really challenge the Israelis to be able to defend themselves Iran is going to be emboldened. That Iran being emboldened will only embolden terrorism against the United States. So I see over the next 5-10 years an increase in that terrorism. I don't see anybody talking about how to defeat that. I don't see anybody talking about how to stop it. Remember, the Saudis have been funding Islamists in Syria. Again, with the agreement of the Trump administration, Trump basically let the Saudis do whatever the hell they wanted, allowed them a free reign. That cannot be good. It cannot be good for American interests. The Saudis' interests are not America's interests. In many respects, the Saudis are still the second largest funder of terrorism in the world. Whether they do it, they don't do it directly, they do it indirectly, but they're still out there. Terrorism has been in decline because ISIS was defeated. It looked like Al-Qaeda was being defeated. The Taliban was too busy fighting a war against the United States and Afghanistan. Now that they've won, they have got resources, energy prices up. There's more money in the Middle East to fund terrorism. It's going to be interesting, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a spike in terrorism over the next 10 years emanating from the Middle East. James asks, what is the worst scenario of China, Russia owning more fresh water? Water is essential, so what happens when your enemies control more than you? James asked earlier, why do few people talk about lack of water in the world? China, Russia, US, Brazil, and Canada control most of the world water suitable for life. What do you think China and Russia will do as they start to run out of H2O? Wars have been started for less. I just don't see it happening. I know there's a lot of talk about water. I think it's one of these apocalyptic scenarios which I just don't see happening. It is true that there are certain countries that have, Canada has massive amounts of fresh water. We in the United States don't get enough of it. I wish somebody would build a canal from, but even better. The solution for water is desalination. And the solution to produce electricity for desalination is nuclear. The combination of nuclear power and desalination is the solution for water globally, and the West can certainly afford that. Israel now does not depend on water from any of its rivers, from rain. It does not depend on water in the Jordan River as it used to. It does not depend on the Syrians not polluting or stopping the flow of water into the Sea of Galilee. It is now completely water independent. It became water independent through desalination. It's little known, but San Diego County is independent of drought. It's water independent. The state of California won't actually acknowledge what the county of San Diego has done, but basically the county of San Diego has installed, I think, the largest desalination plant in the world, and they supply a huge quantity of water, and California should be filled with desalination plants. Of course, part of the problem with that is producing energy, because desalination is energy heavy. You'd need to build some nuclear power plants, but you could also do it with natural gas. That's what Israel is doing. Israel has shifted most of its energy needs to natural gas. They've discovered massive natural gas reserves off the coast of Israel in the Mediterranean Sea, and they expect to be able to support the production of desalinated water. So I don't think the struggle in the future is actually going to be over water. China, by the way, has real energy crisis. China is short of power. China is massively investing in coal. China is massively investing in nuclear. As China brings updates and increases its ability to produce electricity, I wouldn't be surprised if China invests massively in desalination in order to solve its water problems. So, I don't know if Russia has a water problem. And again, I think Europe is rich enough to be able to support itself by desalinating. Yes, Cook says in California, environmentalists always stop new desalination plants. That's true. They got it built in San Diego. Hopefully, they can get it built elsewhere. San Diego is also one of the more conservative counties in California. But my point is, there are solutions. Whether people actually embrace the solutions, hard to tell, but there are solutions. All right, let's go over some of the questions here quickly. We are we're short about $24 to reach a $600 goal. So hopefully we'll get a $25 question and get us over the threshold. I've got a bunch of questions here to answer, so you've got a little bit of time to come up with a question. Daniel asks, what are your thoughts on China's latest hypersonic test? Everyone's freaking out about it. I mean, I think there's reason to freak out about it. Hypersonic missiles are missiles that are very difficult to knock out of the air. So our missile defense system would be challenged to deal with it. I'm hoping that the United States is working on a missile defense system that can deal with hypersonic missiles. What you don't want is to give any country a significant edge from a nuclear perspective to the point where they might fantasize that they could get a first strike that would wipe your capacity to retaliate out. Now, I don't think anybody believes that about the United States, because so many of our nukes are in submarines and so many of our nukes are mobile and so on. So even with this, I don't think China would be so deluded as to think that they could neutralize the United States. But you don't want to give them an edge. I think the United States should be heavily investing in missile defense systems. You want to have that so that if North Korea is ever dumb enough to launch something against you, you can knock it out of the sky. You want to have it so if Iran ever develops nuclear missiles, you can knock that out of the sky. I think Israel is very advanced in developing anti-missile technologies, both ballistic and non-ballistic, because of the Iranian threat. So you want to be able to develop that just in case rogue nations do it. But then the challenge is, can you develop one that can also hit a hypersonic missile? I don't think there's any reason to panic. I don't think, look, the defense establishment have the motivation to panic and freak out over these things because they're going to get budget. They're going to get a budget to, if I can make everybody hysterical about that, and maybe we need to develop our own. It's not clear to me we need to develop our own as much as I think that we need to develop techniques to knock these things out of the sky, realizing that they're not going to be used on us for a long time. So we have a little bit of time to figure this out. So generally, panic is not a good strategy. Hysteria is not a good strategy. And you see that over and over again, where the establishment panics. And they have an interest in panic because panic opens up the purse strings. Panic opens up the purse strings. All right, let's see. Who was the last president you think had a decent foreign policy? Which president had the best foreign policy? God. Who's the last president to have a decent foreign policy? All right, let's go back, right? Okay, so Trump, no. Obama, no. Bush, no. Clinton, no. Who was before Clinton? Bush, no. Reagan, God, no. Particularly not anything other than the Soviet Union. Carter, certainly no. Nixon, no. Disaster. Johnson, horrible, no. Kennedy, no. Although he stood up to the Russians in Cuba, better than most would have done. So, you give a little bit to Kennedy and a little bit to Reagan. Reagan was pathetic. No, Reagan was pathetic. He gave a good speech about foreign policy, but Reagan, in the end, facilitated the growth of Islamic terrorism in the Middle East. He supported it. He supported the growth of Islamism in Afghanistan. His CIA was arming bin Laden. He let 244 Marines die in their barracks in Beirut with no consequences. He basically facilitated and guaranteed the safety of Americans, of Yasser Arafat when Israel was about to kill him. Strangely enough, nuttily enough, you can't say Truman, because Truman, while he was courageous enough, and gets a lot of credit from me for nuking Japan, he then completely flubbed Korea. The Korean War was a complete disaster, and that's under Truman. You have to give Franklin Delano Roosevelt some credit for World War II, but he also supported the Soviets, and he supported the Saudis as part of his efforts, and I think ultimately did a poor job in the lead up to the United States entry into the war. At least when he entered the war, he understood that it was all-out victory and nothing else. Who else? Who else do we have? I don't know. Wilson was terrible. The presidents in the 20s seemed like they at least left alone the world alone. The League of Nations came apart after, maybe under Coolidge or Harding. Once you get into the 19th century, I don't know. Certainly not the presidents like what's his name? Like Teddy Roosevelt, who supported war overseas, or like, I forget the name of the president who got us into the Spanish-American War. Maybe Cleveland. I don't know what Cleveland was like. Thomas Jefferson was good in that he went after the pirates, and he destroyed the pirates, and he got the pirates off our back. I don't know enough about the War of 1812 to know if that was... Yes, I don't know enough about American history going that far back. Certainly Washington was great, but I don't know enough about going that far back. The Monroe Doctrine is a good doctrine. We'll stay out of the world's affairs unless you bring your problems to the American continent. We take responsibility for the American continent. We don't want to bring European wars to us. We will prevent you from doing that. So Monroe, that doctrine is a good doctrine if implemented correctly. It doesn't mean getting involved in wars in all these little dinky countries, but it does mean protecting U.S. interests in close to where we live. My guess is mid to early 19th century Americans were better than anybody in the 20th or 21st century. And Reagan was not good on foreign policy. The one aspect of foreign policy he was good at was he gave a great speech, which is important. I mean, I didn't talk about Hong Kong and Trump's betrayal of Hong Kong and America's betrayal of Hong Kong. Not because I think we should have gone to war there, but because I think as Reagan taught us, the bully pulpit, the moral stand is incredibly valuable in foreign policy, and that's the one thing Reagan was very good at. Hoover was a terrible president in every dimension. Let's see. What is the liquid gold of this century? How do you position yourself to profit, protect yourself with this information? How can the U.S. process? I'm not sure it is. I'm just not convinced. How do poor countries deal with the lack of water? They trade with rich countries to make sure they get water. It's not obvious to me that poor countries have a problem with water. Irrigation today, sophisticated irrigation, even for poor countries, can use very little water. I just don't see it. I don't know where these poor countries that are struggling with water are. Problems with water in Africa are far less today than they were 50 years ago. I don't think in Latin America there are a lot of problems with water. Maybe in parts of Asia, but I don't know which parts of Asia, because most of Asia is in the tropics, which has a lot of water. So I'm just not sure where the problem of water really resides. All right. That was... Daniel says, China seems to practice a carrot-and-stick approach, investing in autocrats and spheres in the West in exchange for more sanction and influence. Do you think this is a efficacious and sustainable strategy for them? No, I don't. Because the carrots are not juicy enough, and the carrots are not going to be sustainable because China just can't afford them. And it's not clear what the stick is. What is China actually willing to do? Italy just signed up for the Belt and Road. What does that actually mean? What is Chinese influence on Italy actually going to entail? I just don't think that China. One of the things that's so tragic is that the U.S. can easily compete with China on all of these things. All the U.S. has to be is more capitalist, more free, more confident, more proud. Japan is challenging China all over the Far East in terms of infrastructure project. The Japanese just build better, and they don't link infrastructure with control. So a lot of people are trying to resist Chinese influence, and I think long term, it's not a sustainable strategy. Let's see, I'll get to those in a minute. Unrelated. All right, can the U.S. All right, that's unrelated too. Whoops. All right, I'll do this one question, then we'll do a bunch of unrelated questions. Can the U.S. buy Greenland and make it better? No, I don't think the Danish are selling Greenland. They have no incentive to sell Greenland, and I don't know. You know, main thing to do in Greenland is to mine the hell out of it. They have a lot of rare earth metals in Greenland, and it would be great if we could mine it and get it out of there. All right, I'm just going to go by dollar amounts here. We got two $50 questions. Let's start with those. Do you think it discredits free marketers in the eyes of the general public when we say New York and California are on the verge of collapsing because of high taxes and 15 minimum wage laws, and then the collapse never comes close to happening? Yeah, I do think it discredits free markets. I think generally the panic, the hysteria, the California is this evil, horrible place to live. When people live in California, actually, it's if you're middle class and above, it's pretty good. I think generally the idea that the collapse is happening tomorrow, that we're falling off a cliff, that we're going to have hyperinflation tomorrow, that you know, America is finished economically, I think all of that discredits us ultimately because our predictions are not coming true, or at least it's going to take way too much time for our predictions to come true for people to really pay attention and to care about them. So, you know, ultimately, New York and California suffer the consequences, and ultimately they will do really, really badly, but ultimately can be a long time. Another $50 question from Daniel. Is it possible to create an objectivist city in Puerto Rico? I sense there are a lot of objectivist types who want to change things. Wouldn't it be easier to start a new city country from scratch if folks moved there? Maybe that competition would help. No, I don't think so. There are not enough of us. There are not enough objectivists to start their own city, and a city is still ruled by the rules of the state and the nation. So how much impact can you have by having a slightly better city? No, there are no shortcuts, guys. There's no simple solutions. Nobody's going to let you take over a country. Nobody's going to let you overtake over a city. I mean, there are now autonomous cities in Honduras that are going to be libertarian-like. What kind of impact are they going to have on the world? Maybe it makes sense for some of you to move there because you'll be freer there, but overall impact on the world, I think minimal. I just don't think there's shortcuts and easy way outs, and Puerto Rico is certainly not the place. Puerto Rico ultimately has a government here. The government is quite intrusive, and then you have the federal government on top of that. There's not much you're going to be able to do to really bring about liberty and freedom. Unless you take over the Puerto Rican government. But you need real numbers for that. And we don't have millions of people. We just don't have it. All right, let's jump to $20 questions off topic. Objectivists against Social Security? Yes. If it is managed by private sector? Yes. We're against the state obliging us to do anything that is not about protecting individual rights. So I'm against forcing us to contribute to a system, whether it's privately managed or publicly managed. I think privately managed is bad, not as bad as the government doing it, but still bad. It still creates this massive pool of money that can be easily politicized. Chile has a private sector plan, but it's still bad. So I would like to see a transition plan from where we are today, that within a generation or two, there's no Social Security. Maybe as a one phase in moving in that direction, you privatize it, but ultimately there should be no compulsion to contribute even to a private plan. Compulsion to contribute is statism. Capitalist Nick asks, how is Yoram Chazoni brand of Jewish biblical rooted nationalism different from American nationalism? which is more secular and more pragmatic. What influence does this brand of religious nationalism have in the U.S.? So I listened to a little bit of the talks at the National Conservative Conference that happened in the beginning of November, which was in the United States and really was about American nationalism. It was focused on the United States. And this is the problem the American nationalists have. Yom Khazani defines nationalism in a sense, nations as being created, as some agglomeration of tribes coming together to form a bigger tribe, which is the nation. And they have similar culture and similar histories, and they occupy a similar or maybe overlapping geographic territories, and therefore it makes sense to create a nation that way, and the nationalism is rooted in that. Of course, in Israel, the nationalism is not part of that, cannot, because it's just one tribe, and it's in Israel, it's rooted in religion. What do you root nationalism in America on? You can't root it in tribalism, because there are too many tribes, and there's no unifying factor for the tribes. So the only thing you're left with is trying to unify it off the one thing that you have a majority in the United States, and that is religion. Christianity is significantly a majority religion in the United States. And so the nationalists, the American nationalists, are all religionists. And they believe, some of them are Catholic, but they all believe that, most of them, the intellectuals are mostly Catholics. They believe that the way to unify under nationalism is through religion. And Hazony talks a lot about teaching the Bible in public schools, bringing back school prayer, bringing back religious symbols into the public square, elevating religion to a significant place as a unifier of Americans. And yeah, there are Jews in America, and there are Muslims in America, and there are atheists in America, but they're such small minorities that they don't really matter. They'll just have to fit in somehow. And of course, Sohab Ahmari's whole perspective, who is another leader of the nationalist movement, is that it really, what the Republicans need to do is capture political control so that they can impose religious dogma on the rest of Americans. And while Americans won't support the religious agenda early on, by capturing the educational institutions and primarily by capturing the political institutions, this religiosity will ultimately be imposed on the population. And, we will, that is what unite us under the banner of nationalism, will be religion. So you can't get away with from the fact that American nationalism is deeply grounded in religion. There's just no other nationalism as America. There's no blood and soil in America that is not related somehow to religiosity. All right, let's see, what else do we have? Are you getting to meet Lex while you're in Austin? Yes. So I will be meeting Lex while in Austin. More details to come after the fact. Michael writes, reason is the whole of the Enlightenment, and that's a quote from Adolf Hitler. Yep. One thing Hitler was against, all authoritarians are against, is reason. Alf, unrelated question. What would be the exact process for one to claim new property? For instance, when we go to the moon or Mars, also, is it essential for government or a similar entity to back the claim up with force? Yes, I think you do have to back the claim up with force, unless you're establishing a new political entity. And then, like, let's say you're starting out fresh on the moon, and then you better be able to back up your claim with force on the moon. But the process should be, if you use it as yours. So the first person to go up and mine an asteroid, that asteroid is theirs. They can sell rights to other people to mine it, but the asteroid is theirs. First person up on the moon will be able to fence off an area and do whatever they want on that area, and that area is theirs. Now, how do you abide by that? I think a free country could announce that it will recognize the property rights of anybody who goes up there, and if they happen to be a citizen of that country, they'll recognize sovereignty over that portion of the moon. So there are ways to apply it, but probably not in the world in which we live, where property rights are not respected. And there's no commitment to them, and there's no commitment to kind of project property rights into space. I wish there was. That would be the solution for space, the projection of property rights into space. Let's see. When I think objectivist videos, when I link objectivist videos in arguments online, I make sure they're about 10 minutes, so not too long to the newcomer. Do you think this is short enough? Yeah, I mean, I'm generally not a fan of short videos. I have not experienced that people are turned off by long videos. I mean, look at Lex Friedman, who does 4-hour interviews. Look at the number of you who were turned on to objectivism because of me. Some of you because of short videos, but many of you because of long videos. Think of what's his name, Ben Shapiro's programs and Rubin, and they all do long formats, and people listen, and people. So I'm not sure that short videos is a solution, and I think short can be very bad because it presents a cartoon of the view, not the actual view. It can actually discredit us to some extent. Bradley asks, is Mackey's error that he doesn't realize the market is what dictates change, not business, but he cares about the environment collapse because he cares about humanity's survival? Should he have more faith in technology? No, Mackey's error is far more fundamental than that. I think all of that is somewhat true, but I think his error is much more fundamental. I think his error is that he rejects egoism. He rejects self-interest as any kind of moral standard. And he has internalized a morality of altruism. He doesn't want to be out and out an altruist, and he believes in profit and so on. But he won't actually internalize egoism and rational self-interest and everything that implies. And therefore, he's always being pulled by the tug of altruism. And this whole stakeholder being in conscious capitalism is all the tug of altruists. It's of altruism. It's all the tug of altruism. It's the inability to actually say, yes, I make money, I'm proud of it, and it's okay, it's good, morally good for a company to make money. And to make money, by the way, yeah, we have to treat our customers well and a supply. He can't start off with that because he can't stand up and say those words because it would be too selfish. All right, we got 3 last questions. Apollo, what is your opinion of kitsch art? Does it have any place in human life? I don't like it. I don't think so. I don't see what purpose it serves other than maybe as very short-term, momentary entertainment and maybe for humor. But no, I don't think it has any real value. What do you think? And kitsch art, what do you mean by kitsch? We'd have to define what that is, which I don't have time to think about it right now. So generally, no. What do you think about autonomous cars? Is it in the future, or do you forecast issues with regulations and how we value human life? Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge to autonomous cars is going to be regulations. And it's going to be some complex decisions that relate to things like, if there's about to be an accident, should the car prioritize the safety of the driver, the safety of the pedestrian, the safety of a pregnant woman in a car 3 cars down or whatever? It's those kind of algorithms are very difficult to write and very difficult for regulators to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And I did a whole show of this about 3 or 4 years ago about the morality of autonomous cars and moral considerations regarding autonomous cars. I think the technology is going to get there. I think the technology could get there fairly quickly. I think the main barrier is going to be, but ultimately, yeah, we'll have autonomous cars. I just don't know when. How do objectivists get into media entertainment? I'm not sure what you mean, but the main way to do it is have talent and be entrepreneurial and take risks and go for it. Try to get into media and entertainment. There's no one way for objectivists to do it. You as an objectivist, you have to have a business plan, you have to have a career plan, you have to have the skill and the talent and the patience and the ability, and just go do it. And if we have enough people doing it, we will get there. All right, thanks everybody. I really appreciate the love on Super Chat. We reached our $600 goal. Thank you, Catherine. for helping get us there. Thank you all for all the questions, a lot of $20 and $50 questions. That was great. And we almost went 2 hours. And thank you for all of you who support the show on a monthly basis on YaronBrookShow.com/support. I'll remind people if they're interested in sponsoring the Yaron Rules for Life, Yaron's Rules shows, then please let me know that you're interested in sponsoring them. That'll be terrific. I'd like to continue that series and ultimately write a book, and we'll talk about sponsorship of the book at some point in 2022. And what else? Who else do I need to thank? Don't forget to like the show before you leave, assuming you liked it. There's still a bunch of people watching that haven't liked it yet. And I will see you all maybe tomorrow at 8, and if not tomorrow at 7 p.m. East Coast time. If not tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern time, then on Saturday, because the rest of the time I'll be out. I'll be in Austin. I'll be doing the debate with Yoram Chazoni. Really looking forward to that. Talk to you all soon.